Tuesday, 2:47 p.m. That gate is coming down, Mr. Merrick, whether you sign the easement release or not, Diane Forsyth said, tapping her clipboard against her thigh like she was swatting a fly off her cream-coloured pantsuit. Behind her, a county contractor's flatbed idled, loaded with a spool of galvanized chain thick enough to tow a truck. I didn't say anything. I just stood there in my canvas coat, watching my breath fog up in the thin mountain air, and I let her keep talking. Here's what she didn't know standing at my gate that afternoon. She didn't know that the homeowners association she ran, Eagle Crest Estates, 30 half-built chalet lots stacked up along a ridge at 9,000 feet, had just pre-sold those lots for $2.4 million, based on a private mountain pass she did not own. She didn't know that the common access easement her lawyer had drafted was built on a road patent that had never once, in 137 years, belonged to anybody but my family. And she didn't know that in 6 weeks, when the first real blizzard of the season came screaming down off that ridge and buried the switchbacks in 4 feet of snow, there would be exactly one contract in the county authorizing anyone to plow that pass open again. That contract had my name on it. By the time the snow finally let up that spring, Diane Forsyth would be facing $2.4 million in court-ordered restitution, 41 felony counts stacked up against her like cordwood, and a Range Rover repossessed right off her own driveway in front of the cameras. And almost none of it, I want you to sit with that, almost none of it would be about a chain she cut with a bolt cutter on a Tuesday afternoon in October. What none of them up on that ridge understood, not one of the 30 families who'd signed papers to live above me, was that the road running under their brand new stone entrance sign had my family's name written on a document older than the state of Colorado's incorporation. And that document wasn't about fences or gates or easements at all. It was about who got to leave the mountain and who didn't. My name is Walter Merrick. Everybody who's known me longer than a week calls me Walt. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 of those years as the road and bridge engineer for Larimer County, and I've spent the 6 years since retirement doing the one thing my grandfather taught me before he taught me to shave, keeping a mountain road alive through the winter. My grandfather was Silas Merrick. In 1887, when this whole stretch of the Front Range was still raw and mostly unclaimed, he filed a homestead patent on 160 acres, straddling a notch in the ridge locals called Widow's Pass, on account of how many men it had killed trying to bring wagons down it before the switchbacks were cut proper. Silas didn't just claim the land, he built the road, blasted the rock himself with black powder, laid the grade by hand with 2 mules and a slip scraper, and recorded, I still have the original, folded so many times the creases have gone soft as cloth, a private toll road patent with the Territorial Land Office. Route access, ingress and egress, exclusive and appurtenant to the Merrick homestead. That last part matters. Appurtenant means it runs with the land. It doesn't expire because somebody built condos at the top of it 130 years later. My grandfather is buried up at the cabin, next to my father, next to my uncle, who died in Korea and came home anyway because that's where he wanted to rest. 3 generations of Merrick men in a fenced plot under 2 blue spruce, looking straight down the pass their hands built. When the wind comes right, you can smell the hay from the lower meadow mixed with the diesel off my old case plow truck, parked under the same tin-roofed shed my grandfather raised in 1912. The desk in my cabin, the one I'm sitting at right now, writing all this down before I forget the smaller details, was built by Silas himself in 1899 out of beetle kill pine, the surface worn so smooth by 3 generations of elbows that it shines without varnish. I don't look like a man worth taking seriously. I drive a 22-year-old Ford with a plow hitch welded on the front. I wear the same canvas coat through 4 winters running, and my hands are more calluses than skin. Diane Forsyth took one look at me the day she rolled up in her white Range Rover, clipboard in hand, consultant trailing behind her in a fleece vest with the Eagle Crest logo stitched on the chest, and decided I was exactly what she needed me to be, an old man sitting on land she could simply take. Diane Forsyth was 52 years old, president of the Eagle Crest Homeowners Association, and, as I'd learnt over the following weeks, the sole managing member of a shell company called Ridgeline Summit Development LLC, which happened to be selling those 30 chalet lots with language in every purchase contract promising guaranteed year-round private access via Eagle Crest's maintained mountain corridor. She wore a cream pantsuit that cost more than my truck's last transmission job, drove the Range Rover with the temporary paper plates still taped in the back window, and carried that clipboard everywhere like it was a badge of office. Her voice had the particular brightness people use when they're about to take something from you and want you to thank them for it. "We're modernising access to the ridge, Mr. Merrick," she told me that first afternoon, smiling the way a bank does right before it forecloses. "It's really for everyone's benefit, yours included." I looked past her, up the switchbacks my grandfather cut with 2 mules and his own 2 hands, and I said the only thing I intended to say to her that day: "We'll see." Diane's smile didn't move, but her eyes did, flicking to the contractor behind her like she was cueing a stagehand. The flatbed's diesel engine rattled the cold air, and somewhere behind her, a small crowd had gathered, 3 or 4 Eagle Crest homeowners in brand new insulated jackets, the kind that still had the fold creases from the store, standing at a polite distance like they didn't want to get mud on their boots. One of them, a heavy-set man in wire-rim glasses I'd later learn was named Roger Dell, called out, "Mr. Merrick, we just want a road we can count on, that's all this is." I almost laughed. Almost. Because the road they were standing on had never once, in 137 years, failed to open for a Merrick. It had failed plenty of times for people who didn't respect what it took to keep it open. "You'll get one," I said, loud enough to carry. "Just maybe not the one you're expecting." Diane's clipboard came up again, and she checked something off with a click of her pen that felt theatrical, rehearsed. "The association's attorney has filed the easement paperwork with the county," she said. "This is happening whether you cooperate or not, Walter." Nobody called me Walter. My wife hadn't even called me Walter, God rest her. I let it slide. Behind Diane, an older woman stood apart from the rest, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big, an oxygen cannula looped under her nose and trailing back to a small tank on a little wheeled cart. She wasn't looking at me with the same hard confidence as the others. She looked tired, scared maybe. I didn't know her name yet, that would come later, and it would come to matter more than almost anything else in this whole ugly business. I turned my back on the clipboard, the chain, the Range Rover with its temporary plates, and walked up towards my gate without another word. The chain went up at 2:47 p.m. exactly. I know because I looked at my watch the second I heard the diesel winch on that flatbed start grinding, and I've looked at that number so many times since that it's burned into me the way some men remember a phone number from 40 years back. I didn't run down there, I didn't yell. I walked to my truck, pulled my old Nikon out of the glove box, the same camera I'd used for 31 years documenting washouts and guardrail failures for the county, and I started taking pictures. Wide shot of the gate, close shot of the chain, galvanized, 3/8 inch, padlocked with a brass lock that still had the store tag zip-tied to the shackle. Close shot of the sign the contractor was screwing into a post 6 feet from my property line. Freshly printed, laminated, county seal, photocopied, crooked in the corner. Eagle Crest Common Access Corridor. Private vehicle permits required. There is no such thing as an Eagle Crest Common Access Corridor. There never has been. But a laminated sign with a photocopied seal looks official enough to most people, and most people don't ask to see the recording number. I asked to see the recording number. Diane Forsyth was already back in the Range Rover by then, window down, sunglasses pushed up into her hair. "You'll want to review the covenant amendment, Walter," she called out, like she was doing me a favour. "It passed at the annual meeting in August, 90% approval." 90% of what? I said. 90% of people who don't own the road can vote to use it all they like. Doesn't make it theirs. His smile flickered, just barely, the way a light does right before a breaker trips. The association attorney disagrees. Then the association attorney can explain that to a judge, I said, and I took her picture too, cream pantsuit and Range Rover and all, right as she rolled the window back up. 3 days later, a fine arrived by regular mail. Not certified, I noticed. They never once used certified mail for anything they sent me, informing me that I was in violation of Eagle Crest Homeowners Association Covenant, Section 14.3, obstruction of common access, and that I owed a penalty of $400 per day until the obstruction, meaning my own gate on my own patented land, was removed. Here's what most homeowners don't know, and what took me exactly one afternoon at the county clerk's office to confirm. An HOA cannot fine you under a covenant that was never recorded against your specific parcel. Covenants run with the land through the chain of title, same as my grandfather's patent did. If your deed was never subjected to that covenant, if your parcel predates the HOA's declaration entirely, the way my grandfather's 1887 patent predated Eagle Crest Estates by 106 years, then their fine is worth exactly the paper it's printed on. That was my small shield. I filed it away and didn't use it yet. I answered nothing. I paid nothing. I sent one letter back, certified mail, return receipt requested, informing the association that I disputed both the validity of the covenant and their authority over any portion of the road identified in Larimer County Book 4, page 117, and that further obstruction of my property would be treated as trespass under Colorado law. I kept the green return receipt card in a manila folder along with the photographs, dated and printed, and a running log, date, time, what happened, who said what. 31 years documenting county infrastructure teaches you one lesson better than any other. The person with the cleanest paper trail wins in front of a judge, not the person who yells the loudest. The following Tuesday, 2:47 p.m., again, I hadn't planned that, it just kept happening that way. Like the mountain itself was keeping time. I drove up to find my gate not just chained, but cut. Bolt cutters, from the look of the clean angled edge on the old iron latch my grandfather had forged himself. Somebody had pried it open, driven a bobcat loader through, and dumped 6 inches of fresh gravel and a temporary Eagle Crest welcome sign right across my grandfather's road, 20 feet inside my property line. I photographed the tire tracks. I photographed the sheared latch. I photographed the gravel, still damp, still smelling of fresh crushed limestone and diesel exhaust, and I noted the time in my log before I even called the sheriff's office to file a criminal mischief report. That was the day I stopped being patient about finding out exactly who Diane Forsyth was. I started where I always start when I want the truth about land, the Larimer County Clerk and Recorder's Office, a low brick building smelling of toner and old paper, where a records clerk named Priya, who'd known me since my road department days, pulled every filing tied to Eagle Crest Estates going back to the original plat. What I found in those files over the following 2 weeks didn't just confirm what I already suspected, it blew the whole thing wide open. Diane Forsyth wasn't just the HOA president, she was the sole managing member of an LLC called Ridgeline Summit Development, formed 18 months earlier, registered to the same street address as her personal home. That LLC had filed 30 individual purchase contracts with the county for chalet lots on the Eagle Crest Ridge. Lots that, according to the plat, had no recorded legal access of their own, because the only road up or down that ridge was the one my grandfather patented in 1887. Every single purchase contract, I found copies filed as exhibits in a title insurance dispute buried 3 folders deep, contained the same promise, word for word. Guaranteed year-round private vehicular access via Eagle Crest's maintained mounting corridor, subject to association dues. 30 lots, contracts already signed, deposits already collected. The total, once I added the purchase prices listed in the transfer declarations, came to $2,400,000. And here's the part that turned my stomach cold in that quiet records room with the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Ridgeline Summit Development had used those 30 pre-sale contracts as collateral for a construction loan from a regional bank, a loan that was already funded, already spent on grading equipment and a half-built stone entrance sign, based entirely on the promise of an access road that Diane Forsyth did not own, had never owned, and had no legal right to declare common anything. She wasn't just an HOA president throwing her weight around over a gate. She was running a $2.4 million fraud on 30 families and a bank, and the only thing standing between her and getting away with it clean was 137-year-old patent sitting folded in a drawer in my cabin, and a plough contract with my name on it that not one soul on that ridge had ever bothered to ask about. I sat in my truck in the county parking lot for a long time after that, engine off, hands still smelling of old paper and toner, watching my breath fog the windshield, thinking about how close those 30 families were to losing everything the second the first real snow hit and nobody official could legally open that road but me. That's when I met Eleanor Voss. I found her the next morning at the bottom of my own driveway of all places, sitting in an old Buick with the engine running for warmth, oxygen tank strapped into the passenger seat beside her like a second passenger. She was 78 years old, a widow, and, I'd learned over coffee at my kitchen table 20 minutes later, the widow of a career army officer, 41 years married before he passed. She'd bought her chalet lot at Eagle Crest 2 years back, with the last of his pension survivor benefits drawn in by a glossy brochure promising mountain views and guaranteed access, no HOA disputes ever. They came to my house yesterday, she told me, hands wrapped around the coffee mug like it was the only warm thing left in the world. Diane and that man in the fleece vest told me if I didn't sign a letter supporting the corridor amendment, they'd have grounds to assess a special fine against my unit for non-compliance. $4,000, Walter. I don't have $4,000. I have my husband's flag and this oxygen tank and about $1,100 a month. I asked her, gently as I could, whether she understood what that letter actually said. She didn't. Nobody up there did. It wasn't a support letter. It was a notarized statement waiving any future claim against the association if road access to her lot ever failed, buried under 3 paragraphs of Jews language nobody without a law degree would think to read twice. I looked at Eleanor Voss, sitting at my grandfather's table, oxygen line hissing soft under her nose, and I thought about the 3 graves up behind my cabin, and I thought about Diane Forsyth's cream pantsuit and her Range Rover with the paper plates still taped in the window, and something in me that had been holding steady for 2 weeks, quietly, finally, came loose. "Eleanor," I said, "did you sign it?" She shook her head, slow, like even that small motion cost her something. I told her I needed to think about it. She wasn't happy. Said the board might have to reconsider my standing in the community if I didn't cooperate by Friday. Eleanor let out a laugh that had no humor in it at all. 41 years married to a man who served this country, and a woman half my age is threatening my standing in the community over a driveway. I refilled her coffee without asking, the way you do for somebody who's had a long week. Steam curled up off the mug and mixed with the smell of wood smoke drifting in from the stove, and for a minute neither of us said anything. Outside, wind pushed through the blue spruce over my grandfather's grave, that low, steady hush it makes before the weather turns serious. "There's more," I told her finally, and I laid it out plain. Ridgeline Summit Development, the 30 contracts, the $2.4 million loan sitting on a promise that wasn't hers to make. Eleanor's face went from tired to something harder as I talked, the same look I imagined she wore watching her husband ship out more than once. "So we're not just inconveniences to her," Eleanor said quietly. "We're collateral." "That's exactly what you are," I said. She was quiet a moment, turning the mug in her hands. "Roger Dell thinks you're the problem, you know. Told everyone at the last meeting you're holding the whole ridge hostage over an old piece of paper." "Roger Dell's never had to plough that pass in a whiteout," I said. "He'll understand come January." Eleanor almost smiled at that, the first real one I'd seen from her. January's not far off. No, I said. It isn't. I walked her back out to the Buick myself, made sure the oxygen tank was strapped in tight before she pulled away, and stood in my driveway a long while after her taillights disappeared down toward the switchbacks, down the same grade my grandfather cut by hand with 2 mules and blasting powder, down past the gates that had been chained, then cut, then gravel-covered by a woman who didn't own an inch of it. I thought about Roger Dell in his creased new jacket, calling me the problem. I thought about the 30 families up on that ridge who had no idea their driveways were financing a fraud, and about one widow with a flag folded in a closet and $1,100 a month threatened over a letter she'd had the sense not to sign. Whatever patience I'd been rationing out over 2 weeks of chains and fines and photographs, I felt the last of it go quiet and cold and settle somewhere useful. It was time to go find that patent. The patent was exactly where it had always been, in the bottom drawer of my grandfather's desk, wrapped in a square of oilcloth that had gone stiff and yellow with age, the paper inside so brittle at the folds that I had to open it flat on the desk itself rather than lift it free. Larimer County, Book 4, page 117. Silas Merrick, Homestead Patent, 160 acres, recorded ingress and egress appurtenant to the parcel, October the 14th, 1887. His signature at the bottom was shaky, the hand of a man more used to a shovel than a pen, but it was there, notarized, sealed, exactly as real 137 years later as the day he signed it. I didn't take it to a meeting yet. I wasn't ready to show my hand, not while Diane Forsyth still thought she was dealing with a stubborn old man and a rusty gate. I made 3 certified copies instead, had them notarized fresh at the bank in town, and mailed one to my attorney, one to the county surveyor's office requesting an official resurvey against the current Eaglecrest plat, and kept the 3rd in the same manila folder as my photographs and my log. Here's what most homeowners don't know about winter mountain roads in Colorado. Under Colorado Revised Statute 43-2-201, private road maintenance agreements are enforceable exactly as written, and no HOA declaration, however many votes it collects at an annual meeting, can compel a private landowner to perform snow removal on their own equipment on their own patented right-of-way for free. My grandfather's contract with the county, later assigned to me, was the only legal snow removal authorization for that stretch of road. Eaglecrest Estates had never once, in 18 months of selling lots up there, secured a second contractor. They hadn't needed to. They'd been counting on me. I didn't tell anybody that yet. I just kept documenting, kept my folder growing, kept my mouth shut, and kept watching the weather reports get colder. The gravel and the temporary sign stayed up through the following week, and I let them. Every day I drove past it, I photographed it again, same angle, same time, roughly 2:47 in the afternoon, because that's when I finished my rounds checking fence line and culverts before the light started going flat and grey. It became its own kind of ritual, that time. My grandfather used to say, a man who keeps his habits keeps his sanity, and up on that mountain, watching a woman try to steal what 3 generations of my family had bled for, I needed whatever sanity I could hold on to. The first real escalation came on a Thursday, cold enough that the mud in the ruts had gone hard as concrete by morning. I'd gotten a call from Eleanor Voss a little after 7 a.m., her voice thin and shaking in a way I hadn't heard from her before. "They're here, Walter," she said. "Diane and 2 men. They've got a truck with a lift on it." I told her to stay inside, keep her door locked, and I got in my truck. By the time I came around the last switchback below Eleanor's chalet, I could see it plainly enough, a flatbed with a hydraulic lift gate backed up onto her gravel drive, 2 men in Eaglecrest polo shirts wrestling a mounted flagpole out of concrete footing, and Diane Forsyth standing off to the side in a different pantsuit, This one charcoal grey, clipboard in hand, directing the whole operation like she was overseeing a parade float. It was Eleanor's husband's flagpole. He'd had it installed himself before he passed, concrete set and flying the same 48-star flag he'd carried 2 tours under, faded now but folded and raised every morning like a small private ceremony. I'd seen Eleanor out there at dawn more than once, standing at attention in her bathrobe, oxygen tank on its cart beside her, watching that flag go up. Association bylaws prohibit unapproved yard structures exceeding 4 feet in height, Diane was saying when I got close enough to hear. Not to me, to Eleanor, who stood in her doorway in a housecoat, cannula under her nose, one hand gripping the frame like she needed it to stay upright. This should have been submitted for architectural review 18 months ago. Since it wasn't, the association has the right to remove it. That flagpole is not coming down, Eleanor said, and her voice cracked, but it did not waver. My husband earned that flag. I understand this is emotional for you, Diane said, in that same bright foreclosure voice she'd used on me at my own gate. But the covenants don't make exceptions for sentiment. I had my phone out and recording before I even reached the drive. I want to be honest about why. Part of it was instinct. 31 years of documenting county infrastructure teaches you to always be recording when something's about to go wrong. But part of it, I'll admit, was that something about watching that woman stand there with her clipboard while 2 men in polo shirts pried a decorated veteran's flagpole out of the ground in front of his widow. Something about that made my hands go very steady and very cold at the same time. "Diane," I called out, loud enough to carry, camera phone up. "You want to explain to me what statute gives you authority to remove a memorial fixture from private property without a court order?" She turned, and for just a second, just a flicker, something crossed her face that wasn't confidence. Then it was gone, replaced by that same bright, practiced smile. "Mr. Merrick, this doesn't concern you. This is an internal association matter." "It concerns me," I said, "because I'm standing here watching you commit what looks a whole lot like criminal mischief and trespass on private property, and I've got it all on video." One of the men in the polo shirts froze mid-lift, the flagpole tilted at an angle, concrete footing half cracked out of the ground. He looked at Diane. Diane looked at me. And then, because pride is a stronger current in some people than good sense, she said the words that would end up quoted back to her, months later, in a courtroom, off my own recording, played through speakers loud enough that even the back row could hear it clean. "This property falls under the association's Common Area Authority as of the August Amendment," she said. "I don't need Walter Merrick's permission, and I certainly don't need a court order to enforce a validly passed covenant. That amendment was never recorded against this parcel," I said. "I checked. You checked too, I'd bet, which is why you're doing this on a Thursday morning instead of waiting for your attorney to confirm it in writing." She didn't answer that. Instead, she nodded at the men, short and sharp, and they finished the lift. The flagpole came free with a wet cracking sound, concrete chunks tumbling off the base, and they laid it down in the bed of the flatbed like a fallen soldier, which is exactly the phrase that went through my mind and stayed there. Eleanor made a sound I won't try to describe. I've heard grief before. I heard her that morning, standing in her driveway, cold enough that our breath hung in the air between us like something solid. I didn't say another word to Diane Forsyth. I turned my phone to get a clean shot of the truck's license plate, the Eagle Crest logo on the door, the timestamp in the corner of the frame, 9:14 a.m. that Thursday, and I walked Eleanor inside myself, got her sitting down, got her oxygen line checked, and her hands wrapped around a mug of tea from her own kitchen, and I called the sheriff's office from her kitchen table while she cried quiet, controlled tears that told me she'd done this before, somewhere for someone else, and hated needing to do it again now. That was the first line Diane Forsyth crossed that couldn't be walked back. Fines and chains and gravel were property disputes. What she'd done to Eleanor Voss's flagpole, on camera, with witnesses, was something else entirely, and I intended to make sure it got treated that way. But I still didn't move on my own hand, not yet. Instead, over the following 10 days, I went quiet in a different way. I filed a formal right-of-way maintenance notice with the county, establishing in writing, dated and stamped, that Merrick Road, that's what the county called it in their own records, plain as that, remained under private contract for winter maintenance, and that no other party held authorization to plough, grade, or otherwise service the corridor. I sent certified notice to the Eagle Crest Homeowners Association Board. All 30 homeowners listed by name and address pulled from the county assessor's rolls, informing them that as of that date, private snow removal services for the pass would be suspended pending resolution of the ownership dispute, in accordance with my rights under the original 1887 patent. I made sure Roger Dell got his copy. I made sure Diane Forsyth got hers by certified mail, signature required, and I kept the green return card in my folder next to all the others. Then I called the county sheriff's substation and asked, politely, whether a deputy might be available to attend the next Eagle Crest Homeowners Association meeting as an observer, given the criminal mischief report already on file and a pending pattern of escalating incidents. I called a friend at the Larimer County Surveyor's Office and asked him to have the official resurvey findings ready to present in writing by that same date. And I called a reporter I'd known since my road department days, a woman named Carol Jennings who wrote for the regional paper and had a nose for exactly this kind of story, and I told her there might be something worth her time at the next Eagle Crest meeting, without telling her what, only that she should bring a photographer. The forecast that week called for the season's first serious system moving in off the divide within 3 weeks. 8 to 14 inches at elevation, high winds, temperatures dropping into single digits overnight. I hung my grandfather's patent back in its oilcloth, set it on the seat of my truck where I could reach it without looking, and I waited for the meeting to be scheduled. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday evening at the Eagle Crest Community Lodge, a half-built structure with plywood still showing in places where the stone facade hadn't been finished, folding chairs set up in rows on a concrete floor that smelled of fresh mortar and cold. 30 homeowners filed in, most of them in the same brand-new insulated jackets I'd seen that first day at my gate, stamping snow off their boots. The season's first real system had rolled in 2 days early, 6 inches already down at elevation with more forecast for that night, and I could feel the whole room's nervous energy about it before anybody said a word. I sat in the back row. Eleanor Voss sat beside me, oxygen tank tucked under her folding chair, a folded flag resting across her knees. The sheriff's department had returned it to her after photographing it as evidence, and she hadn't let it out of her sight since. Deputy Frank Ostrander stood near the door in uniform, arms crossed, there as an observer, same as I'd requested. Carol Jennings sat 2 rows up with a notepad and a photographer beside her, both of them trying to look unremarkable and failing entirely because nobody brings a photographer to an HOA meeting unless they expect something worth photographing. Diane Forsyth stood at the front in a burgundy blazer this time, clipboard set on the podium, county surveyor's preliminary report, the one I'd requested weeks earlier, apparently not yet in her hands because she opened the meeting like she still believed she controlled every fact in the room. I know there's been some disruption regarding the access corridor, she said, smiling at 30 anxious faces. I want to assure everyone that the association's legal position is solid and that ploughing arrangements for the season are being finalised. They're not, I said, and stood up. Every head in that room turned. I walked to the front with the manila folder under one arm and my grandfather's patent, wrapped in its oilcloth, held flat in both hands like something you'd carry in church. My name is Walter Merrick, I said. Most of you know me as the man who's been ploughing this road every winter for the last 6 years, and my family before me for over a century. I want to show you something. I set the oilcloth down on the podium beside Diane's clipboard and unfolded it, careful with the brittle creases, until the patent lay flat under the lodge's bare overhead bulbs. This is a homestead patent, recorded in Larimer County, Book 4, page 117, dated October 14, 1887. It grants exclusive private road access, pertinent to my family's land, over the exact corridor Eagle Crest calls its common access corridor. I've had it verified by the county surveyor. I nodded toward Carol Jennings' photographer, who was already leaning in for a shot of the document. There is no common corridor. There has never been a common corridor. There is my family's road and a contract, the only legal snow removal contract on file with the county for this pass, that has my name on it. The room had gone dead silent except for the wind picking up outside, rattling the plywood siding. Diane's composure cracked for the first time I'd seen in 6 weeks. That document is 137 years old. It has no bearing on. It has every bearing, I said, because appurtenant easements run with the land in perpetuity under Colorado law, and the county surveyor's report, filed 3 days ago, confirms the Eagle Crest plat was recorded on top of an existing right-of-way that was never released, never purchased, and never legally transferred to this association. I pulled the surveyor's letter from my folder and set it beside the patent, which means the covenant amendment from August, the fines against my property, and every purchase contract Ridgeline Summit Development signed promising guaranteed access to these 30 lots, every one of them, was built on a road nobody here owns except me. Somebody in the third row, a woman I didn't know, said, "Ridgeline Summit, that's the company that sold us our lots." "That's Diane's company," I said. "She's the sole managing member, filed with the Secretary of State 18 months ago, same address as her house." I let that sit a second before I said the rest. "She used your 30 purchase contracts as collateral for a $2.4 million construction loan, based on access rights she never had the authority to promise." The room erupted. Roger Dell was on his feet, face red, demanding to see the LLC filing. Someone else was already pulling out their phone. Diane Forsyth stood frozen at the podium, clipboard still in hand, and for the first time since I'd met her, she had nothing bright to say. "This is a smear," she finally managed. "A disgruntled old man's smear campaign. It's public record," I said. "I'll email everyone here the filing numbers tonight." That's when I looked out at the window, at the snow coming down harder now, sticking to the glass, and I said the last thing I'd come to say. "I've suspended my plow contract for this pass, effective as of the notice I sent 2 weeks ago, until the ownership dispute is resolved through the county. As of right now, in the middle of the season's first real storm, there is no one legally authorized to open that road if it gets buried tonight." I watched it land on every face in that room, one at a time, the way a truth does when it finally outruns the lie that's been standing in front of it. Diane Forsyth did the thing that ended her. Right there, in front of Deputy Ostrander, in front of Carol Jennings' camera, in front of 30 terrified homeowners. She grabbed her keys off the podium and said, loud enough for everyone, including the recorder in the reporter's hand to catch clean, "Fine, I'll clear it myself. I still had the loader keys from the site contractor." She didn't get halfway to the door before Deputy Ostrander stepped in front of her. "Ma'am, that construction loader belongs to a third-party contractor. You don't have authorization to operate it, and given the pending criminal mischief report from 3 weeks ago, I'd strongly advise against touching it." She tried to push past him anyway. That was the moment, I'll remember it as long as I live, when she reached for her keyring and Deputy Ostrander caught her wrist, gently but firm, and said the words that made the whole room go still. "Diane Forsyth, I need you to stop right there. You're being detained pending investigation into securities fraud, wire fraud, and criminal mischief." Carol Jennings' photographer got the shot. Diane Forsyth, burgundy blazer, clipboard fall into the concrete floor, standing in handcuffs in a half-finished lodge while snow piled up against the windows behind her. Eleanor Voss, beside me, didn't say a word. She just held her husband's folded flag a little tighter against her chest, and I saw her exhale, long and slow, like she'd been holding that breath for 6 weeks. The investigation moved faster than most I'd seen in 31 years working alongside county officials. Diane Forsyth was charged under Colorado statute with securities fraud tied to the loan collateral, criminal mischief for the flagpole and the gate, and trespass for the gravel dumped across my property line. Ridgeline Summit Development's assets were frozen within a week. The regional bank that had funded her $2.4 million construction loan pulled its financing the moment the surveyor's report hit their desk, and the 30 pre-sale contracts were voided outright, every deposit ordered returned in full. At sentencing 4 months later, Diane Forsyth pled guilty to reduce the fraud counts from felony securities violations to a single count of wire fraud and 1 count of criminal mischief in exchange for full restitution and cooperation. The court ordered her to repay $2.4 million to the 30 defrauded buyers, plus an additional $80,000 in restitution covering the flagpole's replacement and installation, my property's fence repair, and Eleanor Voss's legal fees. The exact figure, it turned out, that had been sitting quietly at the center of this whole story since the day I first started keeping my log. Her Range Rover, financed under the same shell company, was repossessed off her driveway 2 weeks before sentencing, photographed by Carol Jennings for a follow-up piece that ran above the fold. Roger Dell, the man who'd once called me the problem holding the whole ridge hostage, stood up at the following homeowners meeting and made a motion, seconded unanimously, to formally apologize to Eleanor Voss and to request that I resume winter maintenance under a properly negotiated contract, one that finally paid a fair rate, in writing, reviewed by an actual attorney, for services my family had been providing on faith and goodwill for 6 years running. The association elected new leadership that winter. Eleanor Voss, at 78 years old, oxygen tank and all, was voted in as the new HOA president, unopposed. Her first act in office was to have her husband's flagpole reset in fresh concrete, this time with a small brass plaque at its base bearing his name, rank, and years of service. I paid for the plaque myself. It felt like the smallest thing I could do. The Fleece Vest consultant who'd stood behind Diane that first day at my gate was never charged. He testified against her in exchange for immunity, admitting under oath he'd known the access claims were false from the start, but had been paid too well to raise the question. I don't know where he ended up. I don't much care. I ploughed that pass again in December, same as I had for 6 years, same as my grandfather and my father before me. The gate stood open, chain gone, latch repaired with iron I'd forged myself over 2 evenings in the shed, hammer ringing off the anvil, the same rhythm my grandfather's hammer must have made 100 years back. Eleanor came up in her Buick the week after the plough ran clean, oxygen tank in the passenger seat, and sat with me at my grandfather's desk, drinking coffee, while snow came down soft outside the window. Nothing like the storm that had nearly buried 30 families who trusted the wrong woman with the only road off the mountain. "You could have let it happen," she said at one point, turning her mug slow in her hands. "Let the storm hit before you showed anybody that patent. Would have served her right." "Would have served 30 families wrong," I said. "That's not who my grandfather built this road for." She nodded, quiet, and looked out toward the 2 blue spruce standing over the family plot, snow settling soft on the branches, on the stone markers, on the whole quiet weight of everything 3 generations of Merrick men had built and buried up here. Here's what I learned, keeping that folder for 6 weeks straight, watching a woman try to steal a road my family bled for. Paper outlasts pride every time, if you're patient enough to let it. Certified mail and a steady camera will beat a clipboard and a smile in front of any judge in the country. And the people who lean hardest on the weak, on widows, on old soldiers' flags, on anybody they think won't fight back, are usually the ones standing on the thinnest ground of all. I still keep my grandfather's patent in the same drawer, wrapped in the same oilcloth, though the folder of photographs and certified receipts has moved to a fireproof box beside it now. Some habits you keep because they work, some you keep because a man taught them to you before he taught you to shave, and honoring them is the closest thing to praying I still know how to do. Eleanor tells me the county's already looking at a new development 3 ridges over, another mountain pass, another old patent nobody's bothered to read the fine print on. She thinks I ought to go take a look,